This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us tonight Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck. It's a pleasure to have you with us tonight again.
Thank you.
We've had some conversations about duty and rights, sort of an arcane conversation, and maybe we can continue speaking along those lines about the responsibility the individual has to be healthy, to brush their teeth every day, not to eat that extra hamburger. I mean, is that, and the idea of the nanny state is saying, well, we're not going to let you take drugs. You go to prison if you smoke marijuana. If you I don't know, do bad things, we're going to do something bad to you. And it's your responsibility to be healthy, particularly because there's not enough money to support you if you're in the hospital. We just don't have enough money, so you have to, their social contract is that you have to look after your body. Is that a fair statement about what's at least the government's idea? That would be a good thing?
Yes, well that's what the debate seems to be shaping up to be. So if we're coming in on the tail of our last conversation about this, on one level, you are clearly an individual biologically, for
yes,
instance.
Right.
You're autonomous, and yet you are part of a larger group, part of a larger community that thereby has some sort of claim on you.
Yes.
So the question is, how far does this claim go, and how far does your autonomy
Yes.
go? And bringing up your questions about eating the hamburger or whatnot, I remember the first, and I may be wrong about this, but the first debate on this part occurred in my memory in Georgia, I believe in the late 70s, when there was a question of whether or not the state could/should require all motorists to wear seatbelts.
Yes.
And I remember at the time one of the arguments put forward that if you didn't wear a seatbelt and you were severely injured because you weren't wearing a seatbelt,
Yes.
this is going to be a burden on the public fisc,
Yes,
and
yes.
therefore the public had the right to order you to wear the seatbelt.
Yes, yes. So that's a fair statement. Now, I mean, there are times when the relationship between the individual and the state's a lot looser. I mean, you could say that. I mean, I sort of tried to talk about America in 1790. The whole situation was quite loose. And now everyone is bound up together in a very tight fashion. If the state is threatened in some ways, I mean, it appears to me they impose responsibilities and restrictions on its citizens, and particularly in regards to their, I guess you could say, their health issues. For instance, they're going to say, well, you can only have 1,200 calories a day. We're going to limit the amount of food you can have because there's just not enough of it around.
Yes.
Or we're going to, because we're very concerned that people might drink too much. Say you're in Britain in World War II, you have to be a good soldier, a good citizen soldier. So we're going to close the pubs at an early hour. We're going to restrict alcohol. We're going to tax it a lot. And so in a state of war, it appears to me that the state requires its citizens to push the sled, so to speak.
Yes, well, traditionally, when a society, and especially a modern society in an industrialized system, goes to war, the concept of total war, the fact that an industrial society has
Yes,
so many
yes,
interconnected parts,
yes.
the government gains a lot more power as an
Yes.
issue of self-preservation.
And you could say, I mean, in any circumstances when the society is threatened, the
Yes.
government as the organ of the citizens becomes more powerful, they're more threatened, and once they establish that power, it's rare that it goes away. Now, in our present world out there, there's these sort of people that are libertarians, if I could say that. So if you were discussing the viewpoint on your personal health or your rights and your duties, a libertarian would insist that you have the preponderance of personal rights and lack of duty reside with you, and you have the privilege to dare I eat a peach, to quote C.S.S. Lewis or whatever. You know, you can eat a peach, you can do as you wish, as long, and the limit would be if you don't overtly injure anyone else. You're totally you can do whatever. You can drink, smoke cigarettes, eat hamburgers, curse the darkness. I mean, you can do all those things as long as another person is not injured.
Yes. I think to summarize libertarianism at its most pithy, its slogan would be none of your darn business.
Yes.
So.
Well, now the question comes up, I think, about let's say taking drugs. If you were going to take drugs, and you could say, well, smoke marijuana. If you live in Colorado, supposedly, you know, that's okay to do that. I mean, other states are out there. There's a
Rocky
national
Mountain
debate.
High.
There are national debates on that. And if you could say, well, I'm going to do whatever I want to me, and that's none of your business. I'm going to drink a fifth of whiskey. I'm going to, I don't know, take cocaine if I can get it. Whatever I want to do, I'm going to do it. And indeed, the number of people that make that decision is huge. I mean, the number of people that actually take cocaine or do whatever, I mean, the drug abuse is a huge number. I see that a lot with people that are on pain medicine, and they find ways to obtain pain medicine, and it's not so much for pain, but it's some psychotropic arrangements. So do you have any comments about that? I mean, because the libertarian viewpoint, is that an excessive journey?
Well, I would ask in exchange, why do we say the individual cannot take narcotics? I think the ultimate nanny state would be it would be a moral decision because it's bad for you. Or is it a purely economic efficiency argument? We're not going to let you do that because it's bad for us.
Yes.
That what we're seeing here is the clash of two big broad categories of rights and liberties, one of which would be personal liberties, the freedom of speech, free exercise of religion, what have you. We're seeing a clash of something that is intensely personal and cannot be shared with another person, versus economic rights, which economic rights are fungible. That if we take your labor, only you, of the two people in this room, only you can do brain surgery.
Yes, right.
But that brain surgery has value, and therefore you charge people money for it.
Yes.
And once you've got that money in your bank, that is not particular to you. That money it can be used by anyone and can be shared by other members of the community. Yes. So you've got a certain number of heartbeats in your life.
Right.
The state can simply say some of those heartbeats belong to the people. So once you've converted those heartbeats into a fungible currency, we're going to come in and grab some of that.
Oh, well, let's discuss that. So I think it's an interesting train of thought here. So the idea is that let's say one reason that people would say, okay, we don't want you to take heroin, is that if you take heroin, you're not going to be productive. You won't be able to work.
You're wasting heartbeats.
Right, and now in some societies, I think particularly, I was in my earlier days, I was in Thailand, and I was doing neurosurgery there briefly at a mission hospital. And the culture was that this only went for the men actually, but once you're an old guy and you're retired, you're at home, the idea is it was socially acceptable for you to go into the opium den. And that's what the older guys...
One night in Bangkok, I think I've heard about that.
Well, whatever. I mean, but this was in Chiang Mai up in the north. But the idea is, okay, we're going to you've done your deal here. You can smoke opium all day long. On the other hand, the women had to stay home and work, so they were never allowed to go to the opium den. They never got this. They had to continue to cook the meals or whatever.
It goes back to our earlier discussion on status.
Right. Maybe it's a status issue. Well, in any event, so all right, that's the way that society sort of solves that. And in general, I think if you want to drink a lot, I guess, and you're retired, I mean, there's not the social, I guess, disdain of it, the stigma. If you're there, you're having a little extra, you have no other responsibility. So that's one of the things that's a card in the deck in regards to in regards to this, to the use of this. And the contrary wise, if you're a young person and you're at least that's the card in the deck. The state would say, well, now you have to work.
Yes.
This is the time you have to work.
Yes.
And I don't know if people totally get that.
Well,
There were obligations to the state.
Yes. Well, that brings up an interesting thought that if we go back once again to the nanny state proposition that we're not going to let you do things to yourself, not because we're worried about you, but because we are worried about what that does to the rest of us.
Yes.
There are a couple of ways. Well, I can say that if you do that, then you're wasting some of your heartbeats, you're wasting some of your labor
Yes.
that can no longer therefore be shared with the community, that
Right.
it impoverishes the entire community. On the other hand, consider that especially since we've gotten a modern industrial world for the last century and a half with
Yes.
high speed and high powered
Right.
equipment,
Right.
that if you show up at the factory drunk or hungover,
Right.
then you are much more likely in that state to injure yourself or to injure a customer or a fellow factory worker.
Right.
And that is a very concentrated loss among a few people that can be directly traceable to your state.
So another thing that's going on here is we have this relationship between the individual and the state and duties and rights. Is the idea that the state basically is giving you the right to access to health care. I mean, you have that right, and if you go to any emergency room, no matter what is wrong with you, you're going to get optimal care. That's my opinion about it. You go there, and people are going to look after you. You've got maybe you're a drug addict, and you've got a bad infection in your arm from taking IV drugs. Well, you're going to just show up there without any money, and the state's going to take care of you. If you've dissipated, all kinds of dissipation or whatever, the state's going to expend money on you. And then, so the state has, this is an interesting issue out there. One of the things that's happening in our country is the amount of money that's going into the healthcare system is an unsustainable number. I mean, it's approaching 20% of the GNP. And so there are lots of efforts out there to make those expenses go down. And there are these campaigns, sort of good health campaigns
Yes.
are out there. And presumably the state is doing this with the idea, at least they're presenting the idea, well, if you don't eat too many hamburgers and you keep your cholesterol numbers down, you're going to live and actually you'll have the enjoyment of a longer life. But the selfish part of it is the ideas that might diminish your the obligation the state has towards you to look after you.
Aha.
So it's a little bit of that going on.
Yeah, so we alter the social contract, or to put it another way, impose a certain status that you will have a right to health care only if
Yes.
you meet certain duties as regard to your individual autonomy.
Yes.
No second hamburger.
Now, here's another point that I think bears discussion, is that the intrinsic in our conversation is the idea the individual has free will. So that you're out there and you can choose whatever you want to do with your body. It's like in the way that you go about that is you have a rational discussion with yourself. You know, should I eat that hamburger? Should I not eat that hamburger?
Do you dare to eat that peach?
Yeah, dare I eat a peach? You know, should I do that? Is it too risky? You have that, and then at the end of this, you make a rational decision that comports with your particular life situation. So totally rational. An external observer would come in and say, "Why don't you discuss with me why you ate that hamburger?" Well, I like hamburgers, and I get 70. You know, it's just the pleasure's indescribable. You know, it makes me feel good. I mean, my
Yes.
life is tough.
One of those individual liberties that
but,
can't
but
be.
what I'm
yes.
getting into is the idea that that's rational. It might not be rational. And so there are all the programming that occurs in each human,
Yes.
and there you could say these are weaknesses.
Yes.
So that if you're exposed Sherlock Holmes to cocaine,
Yes.
then he becomes a cocaine addict.
Yes.
Or you could take Dr. Blaylock. Well, not Dr. Blaylock's not good. I'll take Dr. Halstead. Excuse me, Dr. Blaylock. I'm going to take Dr. Hall. Pardon moi. I'm going to take Dr. Halstead. This is a mistake. But Dr. Halstead was the father of American surgery, and he was trying out different kinds of local anesthetics on himself with the idea that he could help people.
Yes.
So rather than expose other people to cocaine, he was going to try it himself. He became addicted to cocaine. His whole career was a struggle with this. So what I'm getting into is many of the things on the street that the state says don't do this are very addictive, and they stop free will. So if you're, for instance, if you're taking cocaine routinely, then that's something that's interfering with your neurotransmitters and the complicated neurochemistry that goes on there. So the state is saying, I think correctly on this, if you, we have this debate about the state's trying to trick you in doing something, but maybe the state is saying, if you take cocaine, if you really become, or say morphine, once you start to take this medication, it interferes with your free will, your ability to make decisions, and you really become just a prisoner of this. Now, the society loses your contributions, but on the other hand, this is not, in a rational state, few people would make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because I thought you were going to take us in a slightly different direction. The idea that our Neanderthal genes, of which we did do some interbreeding, and it was the Neanderthal who were from the northern climes and therefore had the tendency to really pack in the calories to protect against those cold weather. So we're biologically programmed to overeat, so we don't have that free will from the beginning.
Well, that's right. I'll expand that. Yes. So what I was making one point is that there may not be free will. That's a conversation for a substantial discussion. There may not be, but such as it is, that there's some things that obviously impinge on that, and anything that adversely affects these neurotransmitters, you get this addiction issue, and so people they can really be destroyed by the state saying it's okay to, we're going to let you do whatever you wish, and there is at least a scintilla of merit in saying the state is actually trying to, it's not just for their own selfish reasons, but they understand that if you go that direction, it would impinge on your free will. It would be a bad thing, pretty much.
I'm not sure I have ever really gotten that vibe. I mean, I think that biologically there is truth to that.
Yes.
Once you're an addict, you have become, back to that idea of status, a slave to that. But I have never gotten the feeling in the public debate that has been of much concern. That the way that the state has justified that is to say that not that you were depriving yourself of something, but that you were depriving the state of something. That the state has a call upon you, and that you are somehow frustrating it. An example in the military might be the crime, a soldier's crime of rendering himself unfit for service, because
he had blisters on his feet.
Yes,
he didn't look after his feet.
Yes, shoots himself in the foot or something.
Or maybe he just didn't look after his blisters.
Yes, or that too. So.
Yes. Well, just to continue along those lines, I mean, I'll just revisit your conversation about Neanderthals, which is, I'll just say this is a wonderful example of gene drift. In other words, you put two populations together. Those populations are going to mix their genes. That's just the way the species is.
Yes.
That's it amuses me to consider this band of I guess a Neolithic hunter band in the middle of the steppes in Central Asia coming upon a group of winsome Neanderthal ladies. I mean, it must have been, I don't know, I'll say whatever. But it's true enough. It's really quite interesting, the power of science to understand this. And people of Asian descent or European descent have Neanderthal genes in them. There's some small percentage. And people from Africa, of African descent, do not. So they did not get this input of Neanderthal genes. And it has some pros and cons to having them. There, people would say, well, this prevents disease. They're parsing this out. I'm not sure how much that plays in the role of appetite, but it is true enough that that everyone is programmed intensely to eat. So you look at the pleasure that comes from that, the tranquilization. So the desire for food is very, very powerfully imprinted, and because in a state of nature, we only come upon a dead woolly mammoth occasionally. You have to chow down when you can. If you're a picky eater,
yes.
You're not going to be here. So
yes.
we have that out there, and that goes along with the idea there's some things we can't control. I'll quote Gilgamesh. The idea Gilgamesh was something from the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. He was allegedly the first figure in the first novel, you could say, if you want to say. And Gilgamesh, as I can recollect this, was 2/3 human and 1/3 God. And in the end, he was not quite a
Yes.
interesting combination of how that happened. But he was going to prove his power by not sleeping. So he in this little 4,000-year-old vignette, 5,000 almost, he said, okay, I'm not going to sleep. Well, he obviously had to sleep. So we have all these limitations that are just our genetic structure imposes on us. We have to sleep, we have to eat, we have these desires. And the balance of that programming and the productivity that the nation requires is something that's an issue, isn't it?
I thought you were about to go with Gilgamesh civilizing. Is it Enki or Enkidu? I can't remember. By introducing him to alcohol and to women and to something else.
I think that was quite a little story. I think he
Yes.
met some people in his travels. He was
Yes.
going to the cedar forest
Yes.
up in the north there.
Yes. And I know I'm getting completely off topic here, but
Nothing wrong with discussing
yes,
Gilgamesh.
You mentioned not at all, but you mentioned humans' need for sleep. I have often wondered, as in my social historian context, that if we did not crash gracefully, which we do, we can
Yes.
push ourselves beyond the point that we really need to be
Right,
awake.
yes.
Medical residents have to do it all the time.
Yeah.
But what would happen if we got to say 18 hours? And then no matter where we were or what we were doing, it was just lights out and we collapsed where we were.
Yes.
It would probably mean history was totally different.
Yes.
So.
Well, the sleep-wake cycle is, a
Yes.
complicated story. Well, in any event,
But
just to pursue some of what's going on with the control you have over your own body and what the state would say about it.
Yes.
The libertarian viewpoint would be you have really total control over that.
It
And they would
stresses
say,
the autonomy.
and so they would say, if you wish to make this decision to take heroin, you may do it, as long as you don't injure anyone else. But the argument against that was, of course, you would injure someone else.
Yes. We all
Of
live
course-
downstream.
Of course, you would injure someone else if
Yes.
you took heroin.
Yes.
And the other question about it is, do people have knowledge about different courses they undertake? Do they totally have the knowledge to take that course?
Yes.
And particularly in that it may be something you won't be able to change course again.
Yes. Well, it's fascinating because you bring up so many different things here. You bring up the legal idea of proximate cause, of what will happen as a result or what sort of injury. The best illustration of the legal concept of proximate cause I've ever heard is, let's say that a doctor performs a vasectomy on a patient and he is negligent. He does not do a good job of that operation. As a result, the patient remains fertile and a few years later has a son. The son grows up to be a juvenile delinquent, and 12 years after, 13 years after that, so make it 18 years after the surgery, the delinquent is, smoking a joint
Yes.
in a neighbor's house. He hears somebody coming, so he runs away, leaving the lit joint in the garage. The joint catches the garage on fire, burns down the house. A spark from that house drifts to a neighboring house and burns it down. Does the owner of that second house have a case against the doctor's negligent performing?
Yes, yes.
And the law would say no. I mean, obviously, had the doctor done his job, second house doesn't
Yes,
burn
right,
down.
right.
But the chain of events is so long
Yes,
and
right,
convoluted
yes.
that the law would say no, there is no claim there.
Well,
So another one would be the Catholic Church's concept of cooperation with evil. You invest in a corporation, that corporation hires somebody and gives him a job who beats his wife.
yes,
Are you, because you're an investor and enabler,
right,
responsible for that evil?
yes.
At some level you are, but those are the operative terms. At some level, how far do we push that causation?
Well, now that's a big issue here. Now I'll just throw this out. Maybe I've talked about it briefly. Is that particularly when people in the political context of things, they consider cause. They have a very simplistic view. It's almost like a deductive mathematical kind of thing. 2 + 2 = 4.
Yes.
But that's not the way causality works. And so you have a 2 + 2 issue here.
Yes.
Causality is a multivariant kind of thing, and it is just a crisscrossing of thousands and millions of interactions that are occurring between thousands and millions of events taking place.
There's a divinity that shapes our ends.
Everything is, and if you parse out just one thread of this,
Yes.
and you take the thread there, well, there could be a connection. There could be a connection. But to get to cause, it's an existentialist word, and it's relative cause, or 22% cause, or 64% cause. And I think that that's one of the problems with law, if I can say it this way, is they have a too simplistic a view. I'm happy to hear that the courts have ruled that approximate cause is, it's hard to go there.
Oh, proximate cause is one of the most difficult concepts.
Right.
In all
Well,
law,
I mean, I'm happy to hear
Yes.
they're reluctant to pursue that.
Yes.
In looking at some of these issues out there, I mean, we've certainly touched a lot of bases, have we not, in our
Yes.
conversation
Yes.
about what the individual can do with the state.
Yes.
Is there any argument I've made the argument against the libertarians. Is there an argument for the libertarians?
Well, just that if you can, once again, turn any right into something that is transferable and that is fungible. If I can turn your heartbeats into money that I can use, then you have at least in theory destroyed the notion of personal autonomy. That if we can make your heartbeats into money, if we the people, if we the state can make your heartbeats into money, then the state can tell you everything you must do and everything you cannot do in order to enrich the state. There is no more room for individual freedom or autonomy in that case. And that is the great danger. That is the ultimate danger of the nanny state. So on the one hand, you've got the state of nature where you are empowered to do absolutely anything that you can get away with. You can kill, you can rape, you can steal.
Right.
And the only check on you is if you run into someone or some group of ones who are bigger and stronger than you and who can stop you.
Right.
The other side of that is, what about that group of bigger, stronger people that say, we're moving in and the rest of the world has to pay protection money to us?
Yes.
Which is the ultimate fear of the libertarians. Where do we find this balance?
Yes.
So.
Well, you could also say, I mean, you could sort of get into the idea of creativity, of sort of personal blossoming, is that if there are too many restrictions imposed, the nanny state, okay, what we're pushing for is an enlightened balance.
Yes.
These two words, an enlightened balance. Understanding the trade-offs that take place, it's irrational. This is the trade-off that's taking place. It's complicated, but that's understanding this is what's going on here. And then many times what people, particularly politicians, might say, well, they're trying to take your rights away, or let's just build a wall to keep the Mexicans out, or something pretty simple.
Yes.
And the simplicity of that turns out to be attractive.
Yes.
But it's very complicated about what happens. And I'm going to make some of the libertarian arguments I would make would be, if the state is too intrusive, if they take every heartbeat or whatever, some of your spontaneous personhood comes
Yes.
up with insights that are useful to the state. So I'm making a case for outriders.
Yes.
Which are really creative people often. I mean, if you go to, I don't know, wherever, go to some extreme place, a hippie commune or whatever, I mean, anything you want to come up with, out of those outriders, viewpoints and ideas appear that are very useful, particularly with science. I mean, people, you're in the coffee shop at Berkeley, I mean, they're discussing DNA or whatever, and something hatches out.
Yes.
I mean, so the idea that if this restriction the state imposes
Yes.
can, in the end,
Stifle creativity,
and
stifle innovation.
and really injure the world.
Yes.
If there's excessive, if balance is not present.
Yes.
Maybe you have to have a little alcohol sometimes.
Yes. Well, generally speaking, the more regulation you have, I think an argument can be made that the more government intervention and the more regulation that you have in whatever, in the market or what have you, that assuming a reasonable amount of wealth in that society, the ordinary individual has an easier time of it.
Yes.
But the extraordinary individual has a tougher time of it.
Okay.
And since the extraordinary individual has oftentimes been the driving force, not always, but often, this is a trade-off we make. So think of a lot of the early inventors and a lot of the early geniuses, everybody from Leonardo to I don't know, who is the person who developed modern antisepsis? Was it Lister?
No, Lord Lister.
Yes. So, and I know he got a lot of pushback from what he was claiming. What they're invisible little creatures on
Yes,
your
right,
food
right,
there
right,
that
right,
nobody
right,
can
right,
see. It
right,
sounds
right,
weird.
right.
Consider when that changed. And people know Stephen Hawking, I
Right, right,
suppose.
right.
They know Jobs. They know Bill Gates. But other than that, after the Manhattan Project, all the huge innovations seem more and more to be by corporate effort instead of by individual effort.
Okay, on that note, I think we're going to have to end
Okay.
here, but thank you for a very enlightening conversation.
Thank you,
with
sir.
Thanks. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.